Well, good morning, everybody. I'd like to reward people who come on time by starting on time. My name is David Irvin. For those of you who don't know me, I see that you've already started to use the chat room. Feel free to introduce yourselves to each other. Let us know where you're from. I think we're building just a really cool community here with people coming on. There's some regulars here that have been with us for the last few weeks, and there might be some new people, and welcome to you new people, to all the newcomers. So this is session 3 in an 8-week mini series, what I'm calling a mini series. I'll give you a little bit of an overview here in a minute. And all of the videos are available on my YouTube channel, and we're going to be posting all of the links to all of those, that channel, and as well as the to register for the Leadership Academy if you're interested. And all of that will be posted a little bit later on in the session. So we're going to go for half an hour here. It's going to give you a little bit of a taste of this topic called credibility through character today. So let's get going. I want to give you a little bit of an overview for those of you who don't know me. This is my book, The Other Everest, one of my books. And this is my model of leadership here. You see 3 circles, and that's culture on the outside. What's in the middle is what we call leadership practices, your abilities as a leader, ensuring results, building trust, creating clarity, engaging talent, embracing change. So those are what we call leadership practices. And underneath those leadership practices are what we call presence, your inner qualities. And as important as practices are, folks, I think inner qualities matter even more. So we've spent the last couple of weeks starting these inner qualities, and we're going to spend today and next week on 2 inner qualities. Number 1, we're going to talk about character today. I'm going to warn you that when we talk about character, it's not the sexy part of leadership. It's the part of leadership that people generally don't see, but they feel. It's like the foundation of a house. When you're building a house, the foundation isn't the sexy part, but if you don't get the foundation right, it's going to fall apart on you. So, the sexy part is the engagement part and the trust and all the living room stuff, but this is the basement stuff. So it's not necessarily the sexy part, but it is certainly a critical. So this is the agenda for the live streamed academy, the 2.5-day live stream academy. So just let you know where we're at. I just want you to let you know we've got a special treat here that we have a Cree elder going to be joining us and giving us a smudging each morning to start off the academy, and give us an announcement of the land where we are. And then also we're going to get a little bit of perspective from an Indigenous leader. So that's how we're going to start our days. So last week we talked about transcendent leadership. The week before that, we talked about authenticity. And this week we're going to talk about, this is where character built comes in. And then next week, we're going to talk about the shadow work, which is about seeing the darker sides of yourself. And then we'll get into practices after that. So here's the agenda for the next half an hour. I'm going to give you a character overview. We're going to talk about how does integrity fit into character, and then we're going to talk about how to make integrity real. So the first half of the first 15 minutes will be kind of philosophical, to have you reflect, give you kind of a framework. And then I want to make it real by giving you a couple of really concrete examples about how you can begin to have greater integrity in your life beginning today. So here's what I call the pain points that character addresses. And I don't know if these are always, when we look at pain points, it's always easier to see pain points in somebody else. But just take a look inside and see if you've seen this in the world around you. A lack of confidence or self-assurance, restlessness, irritability, and discontentment. Not really feeling at peace with yourself. All leadership ultimately starts with feeling at peace with yourself, and then everything grows out from there. Lacking confidence in your leadership from your team. There's a sense of you're not being trustworthy, and really important. And we're actually going to address that next week. How do you know when your leadership, when people don't have trust in you as a leader? And it's topics that I will address in much more detail. Difficulty dealing with stress and demands dishonesty. If you're living dishonestly, it's an indication of your own insecurity because you're afraid to face life as it is in a real way. Difficulty setting clear boundaries. And finally, you get anger and depression. I had no idea until I started to work on this character work around accountability and integrity back in the 1990s, how much impact it would have on my own mental health. And I've struggled with depression. Those of you who know me have struggled with depression. And this has had a significant impact when I really begin to understand building a different foundation in my life really impacts my mental health. And I'm going to talk about how it impacts, and when you model character for kids and foster character within kids, it actually is really enhancing for their mental health. But I'll get into that. I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me just give you a broad definition of character. First of all, it's the difference between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. This is David Brooks's work. And I can assure you, we spend most of our life improving our resume. And then when we hear the eulogy at the end of our lives, not that we're here for our own eulogy, but when we hear a eulogy at the end of our lives, it has little to do with what was on the resume. These are the qualities. I always say, if you want to really define success, ask yourself what you want to have said about you at your funeral. And it isn't even in the eulogy, because nobody says the downside of you, the dark side of you in the eulogy, but it's when people talk about you in the hallways. What was that person really like? This is where you begin to tap into what character really is. And I define it as the courage to face the demands of reality. Now, that looks good in theory, but how does that apply to your life? When you come home after a bad day at work, what do you do with that mood? What do you do with that bad day? Do you just turn on the television and just block it out? Do you go to the fridge and get a beer and drink it away? Do you complain about your boss? Do you blame? These are all ways that we avoid reality, and we all do it, but it moves us away from this quality called character. Instead of saying, you know what, I'm in a bad mood. What's really going on? Where am I having difficulty? And to stop and talk it through, investigate it, learn from it, maybe write about it, talk it through and say, what have I got to learn? Maybe I need to make some different decisions. Maybe there's something I can learn here. How can I be a better leader? How could I input this? How could I have more impact positively in this relationship? When we begin to look at the reality of our life, rather than just escape from it and withdraw from it and distract ourselves from it, we move toward this quality of character. I remember coaching a few years ago with a man who was referred to me by his CEO. He was a senior executive in a company, and he was getting very poor perceptions of his team, just didn't see him in any way as being trustworthy. And it took about 3 sessions to find out that he was having an affair. And I said, he said, nobody knows about it. And he said, nobody would see it. But you know what? We do know about it. And this impacts this thing called integrity. And so what we began to move to is say, what are you using this affair from escaping from? And he began to look honestly at himself, went for some counseling with his wife. Now, eventually they got divorced, but he spent a year learning about himself, learning at where he had some impact in this relationship, where he was falling down, where he wasn't coming through. And he began to look inside as opposed to blaming and escaping from the truth. And the affair ended. It wasn't, it was just an escape. And what happened was he began to live what we call integrity. He started to work on this thing called character, and it made all the difference in the world because he became whole, as opposed to living this compartmentalized life where he lived one way in his life and another way in another part of his life. So character ultimately has 4 components to it. It has the 4 qualities of character. And we're not going to get into all of this. It has, first of all, personal responsibility, which is the courage to stop blaming and decide once and for all that all blame is a waste of time in your life. And to say, I'm going to take personal responsibility for what goes on in my life. It has to do with integrity, which is what we're going to focus on today. It has to do with composure. Val, I'll just get you to mute yourself there if you don't mind. That'd be awesome. It has to do with composure, which is calmness. And I meant to mention that my amazing assistant is gone this week, so I'm flying solo. I meant to mention that. I guess you know that, but we're going to get through this. Composure, which is calmness under pressure, and then grit, this ability to persevere. So we could cover this all in a day, but just in the half an hour, we're going to focus on this quality called integrity. So I got this notion of integrity from working with actually engineers. I mean, we've all heard about integrity, But what does it actually mean? And I actually have valued my work with engineers who have taught me this thing called structural integrity, which means the ability of a structure to support a designed load without breaking or collapsing. It assures that the structure will perform its designed function. This is what integrity is. Now, most of the reason why that bridge has what we call structural integrity, you can't see. It's embedded deeply in the rock. You can't see that, but you know that it's there. So what we do is that we trust that structure. And by the way, whenever you meet an engineer, give them a hug, because most of what we live in our world were designed by engineers, and they're safe. The quality and of the character of engineers in our country, the standards, the ethical and the standards that engineers adhere to allow us to put our trust in a building when we walk into a building, to cross a bridge when we cross a bridge, because we know that there's a stamp of structural integrity on that. We can count on that structure, and people won't count on you if you don't have integrity. There will be something about you that just feels off, versus really relaxing and saying, I can trust this person. They're trustworthy because they have this quality about them called integrity. Now, this is the Genoa Bridge in Italy that collapsed a few years ago. Didn't have the same standards that we have here. And horrible, horrible tragedy. This is the before the picture and after the picture. This loss, it didn't have structural integrity, and therefore was not countable. It was not, we couldn't rely on it. Now we look at the medical profession and how much trust we put into the medical profession, because we know that it is a profession collectively that has integrity, that has gone through a rigorous process of standards that are upheld, that says we put our trust in a doctor, a physician, when we are under anesthesia, or when we walk into a physician's office, we entrust them, and they are ingrained with this notion of integrity, to say we live with certain standards, so that you can count on us. Okay, we look at a sequoia tree, and I can only imagine the depth. This is a tree with integrity because it has deep roots. And I always say it's not the size of the storm that will test our strength. It's this depth of the roots below us that test our strength, the strength that people will rely on us, because we can be counted on for this thing called integrity. My dad taught me about integrity. He probably never used that word. My dad was the Canadian gymnastics champion back in the 1940s. Most of what you see here, the strength that comes here, does not come from something that you see. It's this internal core integrity that he has, alignment throughout his whole body to be able to perform this kind of a function. This is what we call integrity. Now, integrity comes from the Latin adjective integrer, meaning whole or complete. And I suggest that there's two kinds of integrity in life. There's what we call relational integrity, that says the ability to be counted on. This is a person that when they say they're going to do something, you can sleep at night because it's going to get done. You can rest around them. You can be relaxed. Think of the people in your work life, in your personal life, that you can count on. You can rest it. When they'll never make a promise that they don't intend to keep, and they make promises very carefully. Now, this is his whole work around accountability. This is ultimately what relational integrity is. It's accountability, the ability to be counted on. Never make a promise that you don't intend to keep. The other aspect of integrity is what we call moral integrity, which is living in alignment with your conscience. There's a deep knowing inside of each of us that we are born with. Now, it's not fully developed until we're probably about 8 years old. Children below the age of 8 really don't have a very well-developed conscience. That's why we really can't hold them accountable for very much, because they really don't have that sense of right and wrong. But once that comes to fruition, there is a deep knowing. We know what's right and what's wrong. We know intuitively around this planet that what Putin is doing is wrong. That's moral. He is not acting with moral integrity. And if you believe that what he is doing is right, you have disconnected through your own cultural learnings, you're misaligned with your conscience, and don't operate with a sense of moral integrity. Now, oftentimes our brain, through brain damage and through mental health challenges, we can actually lose touch with our conscience as well. But for most of us who live in a civil society, we have been connected to our conscience. When you watch a movie, you know who the bad guys are. Now, sometimes you can be manipulated, but you intuitively know. It's what we call this moral intuition. You know what's right and what's wrong. And living in alignment with that conscience is what we call moral integrity. And when you get misaligned with that conscience in your own need for popularity and your own need for approval and your own insecurity, if you misalign with that conscience as a way of building yourself up, we say that you lack moral integrity. And we always say, if you want to know if something's ethical or not, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Bring it out into the open. If you're not sure, if you're on a board of directors and you're not sure whether an action is moral or not, or has ethics, bring it up to all the stakeholders and they'll tell you, because this notion of moral integrity is within us. So if you want to build, folks, a respectful, trusting environment, it starts with integrity. And Steve Covey always used to say, a private victory starts before a public victory. So here's a really quick example of this. When you get up in the morning, have a private victory. Now, for some people, you might decide, I'm going to get up and exercise at 6 o'clock in the morning. We've all probably had this experience of lying in bed when the alarm goes off. Should I or shouldn't I? And what my dad would say, at this moment, it's mind over mattress. So you had made a decision. You made an agreement with yourself the night before to get up and exercise. It doesn't matter how you feel. You get up and do the right thing. And get up, and an hour from now, you'll feel better about yourself, as opposed to saying, oh, you cave into your emotions, and then an hour from now you sleep in and you get up and you say, oh, I wish I would have done that. And we diminish our self-respect. Now, if you want a formula, this is the inspirational part of the presentation. If you want a formula for how to be depressed in life, first of all, have a biological propensity to be depressed. And secondly, just live your life in how you feel. And if you don't feel like getting out of bed, don't get out of bed. And I'll guarantee it, if you have a propensity to getting depressed, you'll be depressed in about 2 days. Depending on the severity of it, but of your biology. By the way, if you want to raise kids with integrity, if you want to raise kids with the ability to stand that have self-respect and trustworthiness as they go out into the world, which I think is our primary work for those of us who care for kids, either as parents, teachers, caregivers, and we want to have kids live with integrity, the formula for a lack of character and integrity is just having a goal of making kids happy. Because then if your goal, be careful what your goal is, because if your goal is happiness, then when kids are unhappy and they're saying they're doing a task that's difficult, or they're in a classroom that's difficult, we'll say, oh, we want to make you happy, so we're going to take you out of that classroom, or we're going to make you happy and you don't do your homework. It's too hard to do your homework, just because we want you to be happy. And then we wonder why they're a train wreck when they get into university and they're full of anxiety. At any rate, the goal here is to say, you can do this, you can get through this, and I'm here with you, so that we don't leave them, but we support them through the hard times, through the hard stuff. That's how you, first of all, you obviously have to model this, but at a practical level, you work them through. Even if it's hard, you can do this. This is what builds integrity, and it builds self-respect that emerges out of integrity, which builds trustworthiness, and it builds to a healthy environment. So let me give you 2 concrete examples about this: integrity and the tyranny of the urgent. Charles Hummel, back in 1967, who informed Steve Covey about this, said there's 4 kinds of demands: important, urgent, neither important or urgent, and then both important and urgent. And this is what we call the big rocks in your life, the important things in your life. I think probably most of us are familiar with this little analogy. The big rocks, the important things are the things that come in from within you. The urgent pushes from the outside, the important pushes from the inside. And so having integrity means you know what's important. And by the way, a definition of a big rock, and you want to schedule the big rocks in your life first. And then the sand is the urgency that meanders around the big rocks. A big rock is defined as a facet in your life that requires at minimum weekly attention, if not daily attention. and you schedule that in and you make an agreement with yourself. I am going to attend to the big rocks. Number one, you know what the big rocks are in your life, what the top 5 values are in your life, what really matters to you in your life. And then you live in alignment with those values, whether you feel like it or not. And if you, for those of you who heard the last webinar and heard Chaz, who is a person of total integrity and character, talked about the whole notion of showing up in the world. This is a person of showing up, whether you feel like it or not. That's what leads to character, and that's what leads to integrity, where you learn how to be present in your life. And this is what gives you self-respect. And when you have that self-respect, hey, you know what? I know that I'm going to take care of my health. You know, you treat, if self-care, for example, is important to you. And you know what? I look at self-care like filling your car up with gas. I know it's expensive these days, no matter where we live, but nonetheless, I digress. But what I'm saying is you have to stop and refuel. That's an ethical responsibility. You can't keep running on fumes. You can't just keep running on empty, and many people do. But self-care says, I'm going to fill myself up in order. Now, that's an important value for me. So I am going to honor that at least every week. And if not every day, what that means to you, it's different for everybody, but I'm going to honor that, whether I feel like it or not. And maybe that means exercising. Maybe it means eating well. Maybe it means getting rest. Regardless of how I feel, I'm going to shut off the television and get my rest tonight, because I need my rest for my health in order to function tomorrow. What that does is it earns you self-respect, because you keep a promise to yourself through, and you become integrated by doing what matters in your life. Okay, so that's what we mean by, that's one way to express on a practical level, really knowing what are your values. Now, maybe, by the way, you might decide that you need more rest than exercise, and you'd rather sleep in the morning instead of getting up and exercising. No problem. Then that's integrity, to say I'm going to sleep in and rest during that hour. But do something that's hard to begin the day. Do the hard stuff first, and it gives you that sense of, oh, I did something that I didn't feel like doing, but I feel stronger having done it. That's what we call a private victory. And once you have gone through that private victory, it prepares you for the public victories that you'll be facing during the course of your day. Now, be aware, there's always integrity gaps. We never get this stuff perfect. All of us can probably tell me, if I asked you to raise your hand, you could probably tell me that you have a value that for health. Now, how many times in the last week when you made a decision that wasn't aligned with your value of health? We're human. We're going to get it off. But what integrity means is that we're continually moving toward closing that gap. It's true in organizations, by the way. These are the value statements, all these values, fancy values that we see on the walls of organizations. And then we see how people really behave. And some people walk away and say, oh, they don't walk the talk around here. But actually, what we need to do is to have the courage to have the conversation to keep working at closing that gap. We never get it perfect, but we're committed to closing those gaps, to assess really carefully. Take a moment right now, or as soon as you're off this call. I guess you want to listen to me for the next couple of minutes. When you're off this call, ask yourself, what integrity gaps are there in your own life? Maybe you're having a challenge spending. You know, I work a lot in the addictions field. And I volunteer a great deal of my time in the addictions field. And what we know about addiction is that there's no integrity. When you're held in the grips of an addiction, there's no integrity. And what addicts are really doing when they come into recovery is they're recovering their integrity, and they're recovering their character as a result. And that's what gives them self-respect, because when you're held in the grips of an addiction, you can't have that. It'll rob you of any self-respect. So look at where the integrity gaps are in your own life. Maybe it's your spending patterns. Maybe it's showing up in your life in a particular. Just notice what's important to you, and then ask yourself, and where are there gaps? Compassionately. This is not about a judgment, but it's honestly facing the demands of reality. Now, I'll leave you one last little model here. I think the most important promise that we can make to the people in our lives is to operate in the C state. Unfortunately, we all get into the F state. And by the way, there's nothing wrong. This is the sympathetic stress response. This is when you get activated. You get into this thing called what we call the F state: fight, flight, freeze, or freaking out. And what we need to realize is that when we're in that F state, and we will get activated, we'll get activated. If you read my article this last month, you understand we'll all get activated in this day and age. This is this divisiveness that's being created. But what we need to do is to make the promise as leaders. The most important promise we can make to our team is, I'm going to create a safe place for you here to be who you are. And I'm going to make it safe for you to feel like you can be engaged, because if you're in the F state, you will create tension all around you. Now, we all get in there, and it's not that you pretend not to be in the F state, but we all need a process of getting ourselves into the C state when we're in the F state, where this is where leadership has to happen to create a psychologically safe environment where we're calm, clear, collected, and caring. It's our responsibility to be in the C state. Now, here's where it gets tricky, and we're going to talk more about this next week when we talk about the shadow side, is that many of us have lived our whole lives in the F state. We lived through trauma in our upbringing, and we don't understand the impact of us being in the F state. I've talked to people in the F state or who lived through the F state and don't even know that they were in the F state because it's so familiar to them. It's like your eyes. You can't see your own eyes. It's so close to you. You can't see your own gifts, and we don't see our blind spots. And I remember I've coached many people who say, I don't understand. What's the big deal? I only go into the F state maybe once a month. And whenever I hear that, I always say, well, do you schedule it? Do you let your team know that on Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock, I'm going to go into the F state? So better protect yourself. Don't take it personally. It's all my problem, but it's just my way of handling stress. Well, that's not the way that F states work. It's spontaneous. You get triggered, you get activated, and you immediately go into the F state. So you live in it for 10 minutes a month. They live, your team and people who depend on you live in it 24 hours a day, because they're never sure when they're going to get a harsh email, when they're going to get anger coming out, when they're going to get the result of your F state. So it's within you to be responsible. Now, we in our organization have a language to say, you know what, when we're in the F state, let's acknowledge it. Let's support each other. And, it's a very vulnerable time right now. We're all, managing this transition, balancing flexibility, coming back to work, what's safe, what isn't. We're meandering our way through this, and hopefully out of this pandemic. And hopefully we'll come out of it better people. But one of the things that we can do is just be aware, when is this F state surfaced, and get really clear on what your process is from going from the F state into the C state. So in conclusion, let me give you my process. And actually this comes from Tara Brach's work, and she calls it the RAIN model, where and this is a little bit of a variation, but I give Tara credit for this. It's where you recognize when you're in that state. And this is keeping integrity, because it's recognizing and taking responsibility for it and taking ownership for it. And then you accept it. Don't judge it. We all get there, but we need to recognize and step back. I just can't stay there, and I can't lead from that place. Investigate it. Face the demands of the reality. What is creating that? How am I creating it myself? How much is the environment creating it? How much of it was created from my past? Where am I getting triggered? And talk about it, learn about it, face it, be with it. This is a character building experience. And then ultimately, we got to let it go so we don't live in that place. But living in it and just being in it without awareness can cause a great deal of damage around us. And it doesn't exhibit the strength of character, where we take responsibility to say, you know what, I get in there and I'm going to do something about it. So folks, I hope that this has been a helpful conversation for you today to reflect on. I hope you'll go back. Here's the call to action. I hope you'll go back and talk with your teams about any of this material. Share this video. You'll have a link to this video that's on my YouTube channel. Share it, pass it around, and talk about it. What does integrity mean here? And bring it out into the open. And so we can have some good, honest conversations. Now, I'll leave you one last thought. When I say that sunlight is the best disinfectant, we don't necessarily need to put our F state onto the internet. In fact, I think that's a good way of escaping from it rather than really facing it. when we turn it into drama. It's called watching the news, where we turn our F state into drama rather than really slowing it down, facing it, and seeing what we can learn from it. So I hope that's been helpful to you. Thank you so much for joining me.